A frustration with ordinary book reviews is that they always read the book right before they talk about it. I haven't read 1984 in years, and I think it's actually more valuable to say what I remember about it and how it has informed the context of my life, just being in the back seat of my perception for all that time. What I remember the book, and it's kind of mixed with the movie because as I exist in the audiovisual realm, I tend to mix the two. But I know that the concept of the memory hole is mentioned a lot in media, and it's mentioned a lot in the context of, people forgetting things, the mutability of the past, the criticisms of the press and the corporate press and the government for colluding and yada, yada, yada. I think that Orwell makes a mistake that a lot of smarty pants writers do, in the sense that the subject of the book and the population and the audience that it's meant for, I think he just assumes too much perceptiveness. He assumes his own perceptiveness. And the thing is, for people to forget, you don't actually have to toss anything down a memory hole. You don't actually have to go back and erase the past. And nor do I think it would be even worth the effort. People forget the past because they want to. It's too much paperwork, too much emotional paperwork. When I think about the Epstein thing, I think people don't want to deal with it, not because it's they want to forget it. They recognize that the crimes are heinous, but I don't think that people are mentally prepared to actually hack at the root of the problem. Like it or not, society hates women, and they hate young women. They hate youth. And the veneration of youth really has more to do with the fact that youth, it's non-threatening because it's not established itself in some ways. And it's venerated because youth has not disappointed you. It's not challenged you yet. The minute that it does is when it becomes problematic. And society in general has always considered them fodder. Like, the next generation is our future. Well, what they mean is it's an exploitative thing. They're our future so long as they continue exactly what we want them to do. If it's war, if it's reproduction in the right direction, that's what they want the youth for. And I mean, young women especially, feminism is really, really disappointing. And it seems to hate women more than anything. Because if you are in a workplace and a young woman comes in, a smart young woman, an attractive young woman, she is attacked almost immediately. It is like piranhas to a hunk of meat. The older ladies will devour her. They'll find all of her weaknesses. They'll undercut her. They'll operate out of envy and jealousy, and just every vector of attack is probed and exploited. It just, the reminder of your youth is terrifying to women that have kind of existed with this dam of pain and regret behind them. Now, the women that don't are the ones that are actually satisfied with the direction they took in life. And there is sort of a mentorship that comes about. And it's a beautiful thing to see. Just when you come across older women that have something to live for and have had something to live for, it is actually really comforting and nice to be around, because they just exist without pretense. But that's the closest you'll get to the divine feminine. I mean, older women with children especially, and make sure you tell them. It's just like, yes, I understand that presidents and astronauts and whatever, everyone loves those, but goddamn, they all had to have a mother, and they all had to have a good one in order to be where they are. Humanity is not just punctuations of amazing people. It takes a village, and it takes a mother, and just never bloody forget that. That's incredibly important. And yeah, you can actually learn something from them. The bitter ones, I mean, the bitter of any sex is terrible. It's got its own form in men. It's the same jealousy of youth, but yeah. So, but with Epstein, that's precisely it. It's because long before, like, Epstein will always exist. The male sexual drive in a lot of sense is like a vampire, and it's tapping on your window and it's saying all the right things, and you opening that window is a matter of how predigested have you been to believe the lies. And we've all been around young women who clearly had no good example and had been interfered with and broken as kids, and they end up in those situations. And we see it everywhere. Like, yeah, it's on Little St. James, but it's down the block. You work with them. You went to school with them. They're in your life. You see them everywhere. You know exactly who they are. And the thing is like, I know that men are just a bunch of fucking dicks whipping each other in locker rooms with towels, and we just see them as a series of orifices and statuses, and we don't. We really don't. If we see somebody on the street collapsed, even if we're a huge piece of shit, we'll still stop and take care of it, even if we don't want to. And when we see a woman that has obviously been victimized and is obviously vulnerable and is obviously in a state where she's open to that kind of aggression, we don't. Because it's just, we know, like, the real anti-feminist rhetoric is just to know that significant male relationships in a woman's life has the potential to be a fucking hand grenade in their brain. And you don't pull the pin. Like, you actually have some reverence for the fact that, yes, they put on a brave face and they will insult you and they will denigrate you and they will shit test you and they will pretend that they're not impressed and they'll pretend everything is fine. And, they have to be able to lie to themselves, because think of like, in most human history, pregnancy is basically, here's a fucking revolver. Let's play Russian roulette. We could die gestationally. We can die in childbirth. We can be abandoned. We could give birth right as a famine was happening. And for them to actually go through the process of having a child is actually fucking insane if you do a real dollars and cents calculation about it. So yeah, of course they have to be brave, and they have to cope, and they have to be able to sell themselves on a narrative. And so, I mean, they always think that their secret strength is that they can bear the pain of childbirth, but no, their strength is being able to bear pain as such, and from a weaker position. That is it. And God, we just can't take advantage of that. And it triggers a sort of psychic trauma in society, where we realize that all of these men of power, they can't feel love. They've never felt love, because when you're in a situation where you're hedonistically absorbing the life energy of women and taking more from someone that's already down, that is somebody that hasn't even looked or seen the concept of love and empathy, and they can't feel it and they can't express it. And so it's just this downward spiral into more and more consumption and more just voracious consumption of human life. And those are your elites. Those are your leaders. That is the brass ring. That is the prize. That is the pot of gold at the end of the power rainbow. And the reason that it upsets you is because you live in a system where that is the ultimate reward. And they're not going to do anything about it. I know you'd want to think that hypocrisy is something that matters in our society. It doesn't. There are kids with no limbs because of Agent Orange and napalm. And for a war that, I mean, Vietnam, first of all, Gulf of Tonkin, it was started with a lie, with an invention, with a fabrication, and it's an open secret. And the war had no purpose. Strategic, ideologically, no fucking purpose. It's just nothing. It was for nothing. 100,000 people dead. Countless more disfigured. Not a single prison sentence. Maybe a few lieutenants that were sort of forced into massacres by just the insanity of the situation, where guerrilla warfare made soft targets and civilians combatants, and then they went insane. But I mean, the leadership, nobody cares. Not as like, I mean, McNamara was driving around in a Lincoln Town car all the way up until his death, and nobody cared. So if they haven't done anything about that, the rampant hypocrisy in your face, if they haven't done anything about that, they're not going to do anything about Epstein. It's not going to happen. And that's sort of what people are lashing out about. But that's what I mean. It's just like, they don't have to bury the lead. They don't have to destroy the evidence or say that didn't happen. It's just, we've already flinched and nothing's going to happen. I mean, the only person that could really do something, that they could actually bring justice, would be someone like Senator Joe McCarthy. And, well, he spent decades destroying his legacy and calling him evil. And now it's his bloodline, theoretically, like his ideological bloodline has ended. No one's really going to emerge to be like him. And it's just sort of forget about it. And it's not a matter of demoralization here. This isn't like give up on the concept of justice. It's just, you have to understand that this is very far away justice, and it doesn't affect you, and you don't have an effect on it. Now, there are women who would end up just like Epstein's victims in your own environment. And I guarantee that you don't think it's your responsibility, and you don't think you have a place, and you don't want to intrude. Well, you need to. If you really give a shit about this, start small, start local. There's families around you. There's your own family. I mean, everybody's got it. It's in every family. And so, yeah, it doesn't need to be burned in a memory hole. It's just your own avarice does that for you. And, you know, and speaking of feminism, I have to point out that it's like, the best way I can think about it is, I mean, with men, yes, we are worked against, but it's in one direction. It's, you're a piece of shit, stop crying, go die in the coal mine. Like, it makes sense. You're not meant to hold a contradiction. Whereas women, it's just like, you know, you're a genius girl boss that can do anything that you could ever want, but also you're an idiot and you can get an eating disorder if you see the wrong billboard, and you're the future of the world, and you can be a CEO and you don't need no man, and you can go through the university system, become the greatest scientist ever, and you can't consent to sex because the patriarchy has programmed you into raping yourself with every sexual encounter. But also you're a genius, but you're an idiot. Like, I mean, it's just to exist as a woman is already kind of schizophrenic as a baseline. There are so many conflicting emotions. There are so many conflicting loyalties. I know this is a very simpish white knight, frankly gay position, but I really feel bad for them and what they have to put up with. I don't think that not having to risk getting your arm twisted up in a lathe means that you are without pain and contradiction. I can't do that to them. Because, you know, unfortunately, I really love women. I do. I like them. Even if, you know, it's 10 minutes after we're supposed to leave and you're touching up your eye makeup and I just want to put my head through the wall with just the sheer anger and apoplexy that I feel. We could have started 5 minutes earlier and we could have left, and then now we don't have to find a parking space that takes 30 minutes because we didn't show up early. I mean, I would miss that so much when I'm gone, or if they were gone. You know, there's something that I think about, just if I'm ever writing like a post-apocalyptic novel, you know, you think that like you're always missing like fucking cheeseburgers and you know, falling asleep to Netflix or just like a hot shower. But I think that if I were in the dirt and the rubble of society, and I'm just thinking, what would I miss? It would be going to like a clinic and having her behind the counter like apologize, like, oh, the system's always so slow, just, and like her little sighs while she's waiting for stuff to load. I just think that's the kind of stuff that you would miss. It's the banal, but the frustrating things, because they're only frustrating because you care. Like there's just something about pain and frustration that is just like, you're alive. You know what I mean? It's not just the good stuff. And in 1984, I mean, I think of it as a love story primarily. And that's not just me being a horny millennial. I think it's just a love story. And because the government stuff I mean, the whole arc of the book is essentially proving that people don't care about ideology, and the incentives of evil and tyranny seem to just win as a matter of physics. Now, I would argue that physics is influenced heavily by how traumatized you are as a kid and the ways in which you interact with power on a subconscious level. You know, you've got shitty parents, you have a shitty government. And I don't think that 1984 is an inevitability, but I think it's a pseudo inevitability until we can get our shit together as a people and just not have a relationship with power where it hurts so good, so to speak, where we only love it because it's the only thing that we know. Because we're so scared of freedom by being destroyed in our psychiatric infancy to accept it. And so in a system like this, once you already have the inertia, because the thing with 1984 is that, you know, the rocket bombs and the continual war, like the trauma and the poverty that would arrest psychiatric awakening has ended. Like it is a world that is sort of in the, I don't know the name of that Indian cycle of rebirth or whatever, but, what is it? I want to say Kali Yuga or something, but anyway, the point is like it's already set in motion. It's this wheel of industrial warfare hatred, and the point is that you can't do anything about it. Like the whole, you know, spoiler alert, even though the book is 100 years old now, almost. Is that every act of defiance and every bit of like cheeky rebellion that they had was monitored from the very beginning. They knew from the very outset. And a small point that I think about is like that one colleague of Winston's where he was really gung-ho and crazy about newspeak. And, you know, there's a whole thing about linguistics in the sense that, like, yes, if they change the language, it changes the meaning. I mean, this is a classic Carlin bit about how they turned shell shock into post-traumatic stress disorder as a way to sort of nude it of its impact. And the guy was really enthusiastic about newspeak, and then he just disappeared because you can't be you can't be compliant with the system, but you can't be passionate about the system, because if you're passionate about the system, that means you're passionate about something, and that is disruptive. You need to be broken by the system, and it's a small little vignette within the story, but it's very important. And Winston was, you know, true Sigma male here in the sense that he knew that you go along, and he had a pretense of brokenness, despite being very vibrant inside. He did exactly what the system expected and wanted of him. It was strictly within average parameters, and he was under the radar because of that. Now, what is the thing that got under his doldrums? It was noticing Julia, who, I mean, I don't know if you can make a character that that fills your boots just as well as she does as a sort of lover in a dangerous time, so to speak. The fact that she was part of the anti-sex league, I mean, I just love that, because that is, it's sort of like women have this thing, especially the smart ones, where they do that thing where they exist in a broken system, but they do have kind of like a sneaky sort of withholding, almost kind of sensual feeling of it. I mean, I was we had some kind of fucking corporate event once, and we all had to get matching t-shirts, but they were all large because we can't exclude anybody, no fat shaming. And I just remember, like, a lot of the girls, they immediately tied the t-shirts around their waist, like kind of cinched it, like that kind of Daisy Duke kind of, but it's just the fact that, like, they always know how to make something sexy, even if they don't have to. And that's what Julia was. And that's why he noticed her. Like, So she was part of the anti-sex league. She was one of the most vehement engagers in the system, but he knew that something was up. And I mean, that is actually kind of the way that like love at first sight seems to work. Like there's this weird thing where like you get tunnel vision and you just sort of immediately know that like some tumbler has clicked in the lock of the universe and something starts to move. And that's the best way to embody it, I found, in literature, whatever they did there. And the whole arc of them, you know, I mean, thinking of the movie, there's this thing where in the 70s and 80s especially, there's like, it's not a serious movie unless you see somebody's tits. Like, it's just, they needed to have nudity. Otherwise, it is not art. It is not as deep as it should be. And it led to, like, you got to understand with nudity, it is like setting off a firecracker. You got to use it carefully. And you can't just dump it in there because it's too gratuitous and it's too shocking. But it's just the way that nudity was used in there. Like, she takes off the overalls, the communist overalls, in the middle of the forest and runs towards him. Or the next time she's just in the apartment in the prole section. But again, like nudity, like nakedness and nudity is used to artistically to describe innocence and humanity in this disgusting, brutalist kind of environment. I mean, although it's based on Britain, and Britain was actually a shithole in the 70s. Not a lot of people know this, but there was water rationing and desperate poverty and just gross. And actually Canada was a lot like that in the 80s, believe it or not. Like everything was brutalist and muddy and gray, and you add in having a horrible killing winter. It was not a good scene. Everyone was just a drunk chain smoker. And, you know, kind of a random memory about cigarettes is I talked to like a 90-year-old woman once and just asking her about the minutia of the world. And she said that she was a non-smoker and she remembers how she was having morning sickness and how she was almost puking like 90 times a day because everybody smoked everywhere. She would go to the grocery store and she said the cashier would get ash on all of her groceries because she had a cigarette hanging out of her lip while she was counting up the order. And whenever you see those old photos of like 90 cashiers, the reason for that is because the throughput of a cashier was terrible back then because every like, you know how you put in a PLU for avocados or oranges or something, that was on every single item because there was no barcodes. So you can imagine having to input a code, and if there wasn't a code on there and you had to like get somebody to find it, it wasn't always on the shelf. But so yeah, like they needed that many people just so that there wasn't so that like the one cashier can replace like 50 back in the day. Like, kind of an aside. Anyway, so nudity was used well. And when we think about the news and the news cycle, all I think about is, so there's a scene where Winston, he looks out in the courtyard of the Prole area and he sees a woman like doing her laundry and singing some, like it's obviously a low class song because she's like speaking kind of like a Nadstat kind of Cockney. And he laments the fact that she's singing a song that was actually written in the Central Bureau by a machine. I mean, it is sort of like a prototypical AI kind of comment, but it's funny because our art isn't our art isn't so algorithmic. It's actually our news. So the thing with news is, fuck the news. Don't read the news. Stay away from the news. It doesn't mean anything because, you know, we attack people for being addicted to pornography because there's something inherently kind of, you're a non-agent, you're a non-man, you're a non-woman if you seek out this sort of curated experience, this sort of flattened, non-dimensional version of sex where everything is controlled and it can start and stop where you want and the camera always goes where you want it to go, and, you know, any color you like, every color of the rainbow is there at a few keystrokes. There's no going out in the world and actually having to prove value and actually having to talk to women and like convince them of your value and then be passionate and be loving and all this. It's just a biological need, and then it's fulfilled. And then, there's this kind of meme about how, like, when you shut the phone off and you just like see your reflection in the screen, and you're just sad and dejected because, petite mort, so to speak. But news is the same way, because I mean, it's funny because I was in the press, and there's this idea of like, we don't make the news, we report the news. Well, if you're consuming the news, you're not making the news. So first of all, it's shit that's happening 8,000 miles away that's never going to affect you. You're not going to have an effect on it. I mean, going back to the Epstein thing, I mean, again, it's so bloody far away. And okay, say you got everything that you want and all the elites are like rounded up or whatever you wanted, and they're all put in Gitmo or some shit and waterboarded for eternity. It doesn't matter, because like, you still have to go to work the next day. You still drive over a bunch of potholes, and the water is poison, the food is poison, neighbor hates neighbor. It doesn't really solve anything. And the same can be true of these endless wars in the endless war places. You know what they are. I don't even have to say them. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do a thing. And so you're reading news all the time, and it's dopaminergic. Like, you get this idea, like, yes, I have done something. I am informed. I am informed doesn't mean shit, really. You're informed. Good for you. What are you going to do with it? Nothing. Oh, okay. So that's the problem with these proxy activities. Like, yes, you're informed, but... And it's sad, because if you go out into the world and you do something, like you have an effect on somebody's life, or you accomplish a task, you feel good from doing that. If you read about somebody doing a task, you feel good enough about it. And good enough is kind of the phrase of the day, phrase of the epoch. It stops you from doing things in life. I mean, somebody reading the news, you're just kind of gooning in the same way that you would make fun of somebody for being a porn addict. And I think if the news matters, it'll find you. Because I think about this with a lot of, like, think of like a lot of all the informed people in your life and all the really political people in your life, and compare them to the apolitical people. I don't notice a difference. I really don't. I notice that the informed people are more neurotic, that they have a lot more shit to talk about, that they're very passionate about, that no one can really meet them on. Whereas the intuitive people that don't care, they seem to have a more embodied and relatable schema. They seem to talk about things that are more prescient and more useful. And a lot of times they're not looking at the news because they're busy. They're not addicted to porn because they're in love with their wives. Like you can't really separate the two. So when I think about the news, I realize that it doesn't need to be muted, because it is not really used for anything. That's why the news doesn't matter. And that's why you don't actually, like, you have to eliminate things that matter. You have to destroy things that matter. That's why when there are coups, there needs to be executions. But with the news, it never mattered to begin with. The record didn't matter. And, and I'm going to go a little further than this, and I'm going to say the history, folks. So the first thing that you're going to say to me is, those that don't learn from history are just doomed to repeat it. And I understand that sentiment. But here's a very careful distinction that you need to make. Those that don't learn from history, not fucking memorize, not 90 open Wikipedia tabs, memorize history, learn from history. So the thing with history is that, with history and the future, so we're talking about historical analysis and we're talking about econometrics. It's the same thing, and it is the attempt to make a science out of a thing that is not a science. So there is one little cracked open door that we give the postmodernists that matters and is a good insight, and that is history and the future and how you think about them ultimately is decided by the frame that you put everything in. the frame that you observe and that you analyze and that you look at. So history, like the best example of this is like history is written by the victors, or the first victim of war is the truth. And that is to say that you're admitting that there's a frame to be put on history, because history is an infinite amount of things. An infinite amount of atoms have arranged themselves in a certain way, and that is history. But you can't perceive every single atom that has ever existed. So you have to start choosing which atoms to look at. And that is where you, as the victor, will be looking at all of the little motes of information that make you look good, or help the myth that you were in the right the whole time. And when we're talking about translating historical events onto current times in a way to make it relevant, in a way to inform, nobody really cares about that, because in a scientific experiment, you can say that an output was good because you compared it to a control. So you actually, you can modify a variable. Like if you pour a bunch of salt in water and you see that it boils slower, I think, you can look at water that doesn't have salt, and then you can, and it's one change in the variable, the same amount of heat and everything like that. But when it comes to applying history to current times, you have to, like, there's an infinite amount of variables that you haven't accounted for, so it can always be poo-pooed away as just not relevant. And oftentimes it is. And so historical analysis is about sucking away all of the variables that you can't control for. And really, history is more about, it's more about holy archetypes, and it's more about incentives, this sort of ecclesiastical view of history, where you know that people are always going to want to get paid and they're always going to want to get laid, and nobody wants to wake up in the morning and think they're evil. Those are like the axioms with which to view history. And when it comes to predicting the future, this is a whole other bag of dirt, but you can't predict what a good economic outcome will be if you don't have a price system. If you're just making wild guesses, like the price system isn't perfect. And the price system is just being dollars bidding against all other dollars in an economy. And you can sort of tell that, like, if you make $100 more from turning steel into Jeeps instead of tractors, that there's a chance that the aggregate society needs more Jeeps than tractors. But if you decide that you just need X amount of tractors, well, if you're operating as a monopoly, no one will ever know if the amount of tractors you made actually destroyed wealth in an economy. It's called the calculation debate, and if I gave it a full explanation, this would be 9.5 hours long. I've written about it extensively, so look at all my other articles on it where I really spell it out for you. But the point is that the past and history and news is more of a surrogate proxy activity. I understand the desire to look at history, but again, it's sort of like asking a girl out versus porn versus making the news instead of passively observing the news. When it comes to history and inducing principles out of it, it's a matter of reflection versus a matter of losing yourself in an analysis. And the other thing with 1984 is that I do have this sense that people just end up loving power because it's more stable. And I've never really looked into an analysis of the end. I just think that, I mean, O'Brien being the torturer, I think he just realized that he was part of the system and that he was performing his function just as Winston did, really. His whole thing was to be someone to police the system, and he had to do so by mimicking subversion and then by being a torturer. And yes, he enjoyed himself. Like, he got to that echelon, and he had like a seemingly free life where he could drink wine and he could turn his video screen off and all that stuff. But ultimately, he was still a slave to the system. I'm not sure people really get that, but like O'Brien and the upper party were still slaves. I have this idea that, well, no, I mean, like this kind of ties back to the whole Epstein thing, where it's just like your elites cannot fucking fall in love, man. And that is what O'Brien was. That is a man who probably couldn't fall in love, because there's no mention of him having a Julia, right? I mean, for as much as Winston was permitted, well, as much as Winston and Julia were permitted, they probably loved each other more than anybody else in that world. Especially because they had the stakes, and there was this contrast. They were oppressed, and they thought it was meaningless, and Julia was coping, and Winston was dejected. But by God, like, they were down so low and they got so high that even for that sort of that single bright flicker of just like pure human intimacy, they had it more so than anybody else did. The proles were seemingly too stupid and sedated. Proles was actually short for Lumpenprole, which Marx viewed a lot of people who didn't have any reason to have class awareness because they were just hedonists or too dumb for it. The people in the Central Party were kind of the midwits, the people that were kind of caught between two different modes. And I think they crashed away their ambivalence for a moment to fall in love. And that's the whole point of the story, I think. Because ultimately, like, if you really think about, if you're getting up at 5 a.m. to do anything, I mean, it's for love. Like, there's no other. It all is kind of freebase down to that. And I don't think that I'm being necessarily sanguine or romantic about it. In fact, it's for me, I feel it's just a very cold reduction, just in the sense that I'm trying to find the thing at the root of everything, the unified field theory of human consciousness and existence. And, you know, unfortunately, I just end up romantic over it. That is when a permanently online nerd eats his way through to the other side and finds that it is like the end of THX, where he just climbs out of the hole and sees the sunset.